3 counties, 24 cities, working together, accomplishing more than any of us could alone. Whether your roots run generations deep, or you recently moved to Greater Portland, you are a part of Metro, the nation's only regional government elected by the people. Planning for the future, preserving what we love. Let's keep our region thriving for decades to come.
I'm Laura Lepley, a Metro Park Ranger. Here at Oxbow Park, safety is our #1 priority, not only for our guests, but for our staff members. I'm at the Welcome Center and you're at the Regional Center. The council chambers are located on the 3rd floor. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room. Go down the stairway to the 2nd floor, exit through the main entrance by the reception desk, and gather in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the reception desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you, and come visit us at Oxbow Park.
All right, I'm going to declare a quorum and call the Metro Council business meeting to order. I'm going to ask our clerk, Georgia Langer, to call a roll for attendance.
Yes. Counselor Simpson.
Present. Good morning.
Counselor Lewis.
Present.
Counselor Gonzalez.
Present.
Counselor Rosenthal.
Present.
Counselor Nolan.
Present.
Council President Peterson is excused, and Deputy Council President Wong.
Present. Thank you. I had a request to open up some space for Counselor Nolan to make a few remarks. Counselor Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Concejal González, en reflexión, me doy cuenta de que una de mis preguntas para usted el martes, durante nuestra discusión del ARPAC, le faltó al respecto a usted, así como a las personas en nuestra audiencia. Hice referencia a sus comentarios pidiéndose que los repetí en inglés. Le falta el respeto a su urgencia. Lamento sinceramente haber elegido entonces usar palabras que fueron duras en tono y desdeñosas en sustancia. Voy a reflexionar más y dar más sensibilidad a mis comentarios en el futuro. A usted y a otras en el estrado y en la sala virtual. Perdóname. Counselor Gonzalez. On reflection, I realize one of my questions to you on Tuesday, during our discussion of the RPAC, disrespected you as well as people in our audience. I referenced your comments by asking you to repeat them in English. I disrespected your heritage. I'm genuinely sorry that I made the choice then to use words that were harsh in tone and dismissive in substance. I will give more thought and sensitivity to my comments in the future, to you as well as to others on the dais and in the virtual room. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Counselor Nolan. And we'll move on then, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'll just thank you, Counselor Nolan.
Okay. We'll move on then. Thank you. I'll move on to public communication. We'll open for public communication on non-agenda items. Georgia, will you please describe to the audience our procedures we use for public communications?
Yes. If you are testifying in person, please sign up by filling out a blue card in the back of the room and bringing it up to me. If you are testifying on Zoom or by phone, please sign up by using the raise hand function in the reactions or more menus or by dialing *9. When it is your turn to testify, I'll call on your name or phone number. For those on Zoom, click accept to be promoted to a panelist. Your Zoom window will close briefly before you rejoin as a panelist, and you can turn on your camera if you'd like. Testimony is limited to 3 minutes, and the timer begins when you begin speaking. If you are testifying in person, there are timers located on your testimony table, on the wall, and on the digital screen. Please state your name for the record before testifying. You do not need to give your physical address. And I do see one person with their hand raised in the audience, so I'm going to promote Matt Kelly to a panelist.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, good morning. And sorry, just looking here. Good morning, Metro Council members. My name is Matt Kelly. I'm a Portland resident and part of a group of citizens raising awareness about the proposed demolition of the Lloyd Center. Today, the mall functions as an important small business incubator and a de facto year-round community center where people can gather, walk, and ice skate indoors. We're concerned that the current mix of small businesses, nonprofits, art spaces, and indoor public life would be difficult to replace at the same scale under the proposed master plan. We're also really concerned about the timing. The mall is demolished. It would take many years for the 14 proposed parcels to be sold and redeveloped, given Portland's real estate market. We do not need more vacant lots in Portland's central city. And we're concerned about waste. A full demolition would send a huge amount of embodied carbon into the landfill and erase a community fixture, even though compelling alternatives exist, such as partial demolition or redevelopment focused on just the anchor stores and the underused parking areas. I'm here today to ask you to consider how Metro might incentivize an alternative vision for Lloyd Center, one that treats it as a civic infrastructure worth reusing, not discarding. It's encouraging that Metro's Regional Systems Facilities Plan, adopted just last year, calls for investing over $37 million to fund a reuse warehouse and a reuse mall. I believe that Lloyd Center is an ideal location for both, and I understand that the timeline for those two are probably years out, but still would like for you to think about how the Lloyd Center might be part of that vision. I also understand that Reclaim It, one of Metro's Reuse Impact Fund grant recipients, is also looking for a new space, and I think it'd be great if Reclaim It could move into the Lloyd Center as well and be part of this much needed reuse mall. So I ask you to see beyond the headlines that have proclaimed Lloyd's demise. The master plan proposed by the developer is still being reviewed by the Portland Design Commission and has not yet been approved, despite what headlines might otherwise suggest. The Save Lloyd Coalition, along with another coalition that's focused on specifically the ice rink, will continue to urge the developer and city leaders to consider an alternate vision for Lloyd. I'd encourage you as council members to visit the Lloyd Center in the following weeks, see the culture that has come to life there, and imagine what it would look like for Portland's reuse mall to be located right in the heart of the city. I'd ask if you have any updates on your feasibility studies for the reuse warehouse, and also please consider the Save Lloyd Coalition as willing partners in helping Metro Regional System Facilities Plan be a success. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Sorry. We do not have anyone else with their hands raised in the audience today.
Great, thank you. And we'll follow up on that. Okay, let's move on to our presentation for the day. This is item 2.1, Supportive Housing Services Oversight Committee for fiscal year 25 annual report. We will turn now to the Supportive Housing Services Regional Oversight Committee to provide the FY25 annual report. This is the SHS Regional Oversight Committee's final annual report presentation to Metro Council. In the spring, Metro Council will launch its new SHS, Regional Policy and Oversight Committee. We look forward to hearing the current committee's recommendations on how to strengthen SHS governance and implementation. We'd like to welcome Yesenia Delgado, SHS Division Director, and our co-chairs, Mike Savara and Dr. Taylor. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, and good morning, Metro Councilors. My name is Yesenia Delgado. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the SHS Division Director with the Metro Housing Department. As Councilor Wong shared, today I'm joined by Mike Savara and Dr. Mandrill Taylor, who are both Oversight Committee co-chairs, and we are pleased to bring you today an update on the 4th Annual Regional Report that covers SHS implementation for the period between July 2024 and June 2025. As you know, voters of the Metro region approved a historic measure designed to establish a regional homeless system of care in partnership with Washington, Multnomah, and Clackamas County, all who had some level of homeless services programming prior to SHS, and SHS has really supported the growth and expansion of homeless services in each of these counties. So we, over the last 4 years, have really worked to implement a regional system of care with local infrastructure and implementation. And one of the requirements of this SHS system via the Metro SHS work plan and intergovernmental agreements with our county partners is that they submit to Metro and the Supportive Housing Services Oversight Committee a annual report by October 31st of every year for the prior year. The annual reports at a high level that are submitted provide an overview of how program funds in the previous year were used and how those expenditures contributed to the broader outcomes in the local implementation plans, but also the Metro SHS work plan goals and regional outcome metrics. The SHS Oversight Committee, who was established by Metro Council to conduct independent oversight for the fund, along with us as Metro staff, have been reviewing these county annual reports, and then the Oversight Committee drafts what we call the regional annual report for that year. The report includes a detailed evaluation of each county's annual report for consistency with SHS requirements, progress towards those commitments. It also provides an overview of the challenges experienced in that year, as well as opportunities. The Oversight Committee then brings their findings and recommendations on how to improve oversight and accountability for SHS, and they bring that to you all as Metro Council for consideration, as well as the 3 County Board of Commissioners. So today starts our first stop in that presentation list that I just mentioned. So if we go to the next slide here, I'll just review a little bit more what you all can expect for today's presentation, which includes an overview of supportive housing services, as well as an overview of the regional report that you all should have received earlier this month. They will also be covering their recommendations that they're asking for your support on today. I will note that the regional report was completed as Metro Council was deliberating and finalized the SHS reforms that you all passed last December. The committee, during their discussions on the regional report, were informed of these SHS reforms updates and took that into consideration as they were drafting this regional report and recommendations. So the recommendations that you all will see here today as the Oversight Committee gets sunsetted next month is really geared towards how to strengthen oversight and governance for this next phase of SHS as the Regional Policy and Oversight Committee stand up. I want to thank Dr. Taylor and Mike for their commitment and leadership to the Oversight Committee over this last season and everything that they've done, but also extend my gratitude to all members of the Oversight Committee and all their countless hours that they spent to provide oversight for this fund, particularly around this regional report season that just takes quite a lift to be able to get done within this timeline. And before I pass it over to them, we're going to go to the next slide that really provides an overview of the 10-year goals that the Oversight Committee was comparing progress up against. So as you all know, as part of the SHS Reforms Work Plan, we are in the middle of establishing new 5-year and interim goals, but given that we didn't have those and that this is assessing progress for this last fiscal year, what you see here on the screen we've talked about this before, are the 10-year goals that they have really focused in on, which include reducing barriers to housing stability for communities of color, connecting at least 5,000 households experiencing homelessness to permanent supportive housing, stabilizing at least 10,000 households at risk or experiencing homelessness into permanent supportive housing, and also looking at the SHS regional outcome metrics that really provide some additional goals around areas of housing stability, equitable service delivery, and engagement and decision making. So you'll hear a little bit more about progress for each of these goal areas from co-chairs, but I just wanted to make sure that we grounded you all in terms of what the 10-year goals that they were working towards were. So with that, I will pass it over to Mike, who will walk us through some updates on where we're at with these regional goals.
Great, thank you so much, Yesenia. And if we can go to the next slide. So we'll just cover here a couple of the key highlights that we had from the last fiscal year. As you can see here, this year was really marked by a lot of continued expansion of some of the work. So the county's contracted with 107 service providers in all, including 16 culturally specific organizations. Those organizations received a total of $44.4 million, which is a 477% increase from year 1 to year 4. So again, as part of that overall goal, we're really seeing that continued investment in providers that have really been walking alongside those who are most impacted by housing instability and homelessness in our region. The Tri-County Planning Body has also continued to progress in their work as they've made sure that the Metro, the counties, and other partners are really implementing through a lens of regionalism and really thinking about how to tackle some of the big sticky issues across the system. So things like launching the implementation of a training and technical assistance model, aligning work and healthcare, landlord engagement, working on coordinated entry. These are really key aspects of the work that Tri-County Planning Body has been doing and that the Oversight Committee has been supporting, and that work has continued on. Additionally, we also saw just the spending of the counties has really continued to increase. We saw $424.9 million in total spending last year, which is a 44% increase from the year before. So I think it's really true that this year we saw the system really start to be in full swing as the program has really been through the initial years of implementation. We can go to the next slide. We can talk a little bit more about some of the performance that we saw. So this chart, you can see here, the green is the regional goal that was set for that year, and then the blue bars are the amounts of totals that were actually achieved. You can see here that at the regional level, the counties exceeded their combined goals for permanent supportive housing placements, rapid rehousing placements, as well as both of the retention goals. And homelessness prevention and shelter units. So in all, we're seeing performance across the region continue to improve. One note here is that the supportive housing units that were actually brought into operation in fiscal year 25, we did not meet that goal as a region. 73% of the combined goal was met. This is because of two main factors, as we heard, that during this fiscal year, Metro provided an update on the economic forecast, and counties reacted in some ways by slowing their rate of adoption of new supportive housing units to make sure that there was a good understanding of the ability to continue paying for these ongoing costs. Additionally, delays in bringing permanent supportive housing units into operation through construction was another factor. You can also see that this is the first time that the region has actually met all of the core goals of the measure, which is definitely a significant achievement. If we can go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the key goals around how we're doing as a region with respect to our goal in advancing race equity. You can see here, this is a measure on the screen of the rate of people of color, non-Hispanic whites, and folks that didn't report race or ethnicity as compared to the annual point in time count, which is sort of our best tool that we have to be able to understand the lay of the land for people experiencing homelessness. It's definitely has many flaws, but it really is sort of our best opportunity to get a sense for the system and how people are experiencing homelessness and sort of the makeup. You can see that overall we are serving people of color more than they are represented in the point in time count. And non-Hispanic whites slightly less. And really, this is a part of the strategy that we've been seeing, because we know that if you zoom out and look at the rate of people of color experiencing homelessness in the state and in the region, we see so many times that people of color are overrepresented in their experience of homelessness and their experience of housing instability. And so as a system, we need to be able to invest in solutions that support people of color and other overrepresented groups more than their share in the general population to change that trajectory for our folks. So we're excited about some of the work that we've seen here in terms of, again, that investment in culturally specific organizations, those with the expertise and relationships that have been key to making sure this is a part of our overall system. We're excited that the continued work here and the commitment from Metro and the counties to continue making sure that race equity is a key part of our strategy. If we can go to the next slide. This dives a little bit more into some of the service delivery. Again, we talked briefly about the number of contracts that culturally specific providers as one of those key metrics in the SHS work plan, as well as the value of the contracts themselves. You can see, each of the counties has really steadily increased in large part both the rate of adoption of contracts with culturally specific providers, but also the value of those contracts, making sure that we're continuing to see that equitable service delivery as a core part of the strategies from the counties. I think this is a really good marker of the ability to build that system that we want to see, that's thinking about anti-racist policies, that's thinking about gender-affirming systems, that is expansive to make sure that all community members have access to housing and support services. If we can go to the next slide. Talk a little bit about engagement and decision making. This is another area where we see it's such an important aspect of making sure that a system is aligned with the needs of those who are experiencing the problem the most. We can see that each of these are areas where the counties have created advisory groups that help them make decisions, help them drive towards solutions, and the makeup of those specific advisory groups. So this is a good example of how we're trying to track and understand the ways that counties are making decisions and getting input from people with lived experience of homelessness and people of color and other represented groups that really need a voice at the table to be able to kind of drive towards the solutions that work for their communities. Go to the next slide. We'll talk, actually I'll pass to Dr. Taylor to dig into some numbers.
Okay. So before I walk you through the numbers, we need context about why spending growth, why it matters. So as years of underproduction across the region, maybe nearly 1,500 evictions filed monthly. Nearly half of those renter households are cost burden. And this is the environment that we're working in. So spending growth matters because scale is what closes the gap between investment and impact. If you take a look at the slide, you'll see county spending in year 4 totaled $425 million. Now that's 44% of an increase over the prior year and 185% increase compared to year 2. And this is despite the 3% decline in tax collections. And if you take a look there at the early years, you'll see underspending, and it would appear that it would be a challenge, but during that time period, programs were ramping up, providers were being contracted, infrastructure was being built. And so at that time, our focus centered on essential capacity building. But we're 4 years in at this point. Counties that spend every dollar collected continued drawing down prior year carryover to scale up towards the level of response that the crisis demands. And of course, with the understanding that this rate of growth cannot continue if tax revenue are in decline, which brings us to the next slide. In year 4, the gross tax collection of the SHS came in at $325 million. Now, that's about $10 million below the prior year and roughly $22 million below year 2. And after you deduct the collection cost of $9.9 million and the Metro 5% admin allowance of $15.8 million, counties received a combination of $299.3 million in net revenue, which was distributed in accordance with the implementation plan showed on the slide. Multnomah, 45 1/3%, Washington, 33 1/3%, and Clackamas, 21 1/3%. Next slide. Now, This slide puts the same revenue picture, but it puts it in a county focus. This slide puts, well, let's take a look. 299 million in net tax revenue is just one part of each county's resource picture. It's actually combined with a significant prior year carryover balance. The three counties entered year 4 with the total resource pool of 687 million. That carryover reflects years of deliberate, sometimes slow ramp up. It's a product of building deliberately durable systems rather than just rushing to spend on the onset. And now in year 4, those reserves enable counties to spend at a level that far exceeds the current year collection alone. Next slide. And this slide shows where the 424 million went. The largest category, the permanent supportive housing at 122.6 million. It's really the most resource-intensive intervention in the system. Long-term subsidized housing paired with wraparound services, most complex needs, and it being at the top list, it reflects the right priorities. Safety on and off the street came in at 116.8 million. This includes shelter and outreach, the work that meets people where they're at and creates pathways towards stability. And I believe third was, system and support costs. That's 67.4 million. This would cover infrastructure, capacity building, services that make the whole system run. And of course, there is the county administration costs, which came in at 14.4 million. Which is exactly 5% of the total expenditures in line with Metro's recommendation. Which brings us to the next slide. So this committee is charged with reviewing admit rates for Metro, counties, service providers, recommending any adjustments. So this slide gives us what that landscape looks like currently. And I guess for context, admin rates represent the share of a provider's budget that's allocated to running an organization, rent, accounting, legal, HR, which is distinct from the direct program spending itself. 78% of our contracted providers had a rate at or below 15%, which is strong. Now, for those with higher rate, context certainly matters. Many are using federally negotiated indirect cost rates that apply for a portion of the budget, like personnel rather than its whole entirety. We have several providers in Multnomah County that's negotiated county approved rates. So this makes the apple-to-apple comparison a little difficult. But really, in short, the administrative funding is what keeps an organization viable. Organization size, its service type, its insurance needs, facility costs, they all drive variation. Next slide. I guess I'll pass it back.
Great, thank you, Dr. Taylor. So we're going to get into more of the committee's challenges that we've noted, and then some of the recommendations. So kind of moving into that section of our report. In this page, we want to talk about some of the obvious challenges that you all are well aware of, but I think it's important to kind of name some of these. So the systemic factors that are really driving where we are as a region in terms of the rate of people experiencing homelessness are so important to name in this discussion. The homeless services system is built in so many ways to support people experiencing homelessness, but it's not built to solve every social problem out there. And so things like high housing costs, the insufficient supply of housing that people can afford, rising costs in general, just in terms of inflation, incomes that don't meet people's needs, lack of childcare that's accessible and affordable, inadequate resources for mental health and behavioral health services. These are all examples of things that are driving people to be at higher risk of experiencing homelessness in our region that the supportive housing services measure was never intended to address completely. The programs are really built on top of the rest of the social services system fabrics, and I think that's such an important piece for folks to understand when we think about the performance of the homeless services system. We also have to ask, well, what's it meant to do exactly? And where does it sit within the responsibility of all these other problems and social systems. Another aspect of this is just the growing need that we've seen since the post-pandemic era. So, I think this is a really important thing to name, is that we're seeing that the rate of housing placements that the system is able to put into new homes is far outpacing the rate of people falling into homelessness. So we've recently been able to see at a regional level through some really important data that for every 10 people who exited the region's homeless services system to permanent housing, an average of 30 people entered the homeless services system. So maybe they entered shelter or they engaged with a street outreach worker. That's not to mention the countless folks that we don't know about that end up in a family member or a friend's home, or are otherwise invisible to the system and aren't asking or receiving help. So this growing need is a big part of where we're seeing the trends of rising rates of homelessness coming from. And this is a nationwide trend. We're seeing this across the country, and we're seeing this in so many areas. But it's an important part of the context as we talk about, like, is this program working? Is it successful? We have to really measure that across the reality that we're facing a very large problem with respect to housing affordability overall. And then the last is just resource constraints. I mean, I think this is the first year where we really started to have to have these hard conversations about prioritizing the resources that we did have. We saw that earlier on when counties they saw the fiscal year 24 forecast that Metro produced. They started to pull back in some areas of key spending. So I think this is an area where we have to start asking ourselves, like, what's the most important things to spend our resources on that we do have, and where do we prioritize as a region? So I think these are the kind of main challenges that we see in front of us as a region. And you'll see kind of our recommendations if we can go to the next slide, and then one more. We'll just jump right into the recommendations. The committee, I think really, as Yesenia was talking earlier, we tried to form our recommendations with the fact that this body is ending, and we're transitioning into a new phase as this moves on. And so you'll see some of our recommendations are really thinking with respect to that future governance model and the things that we think as a group that we've really learned over the last 4 years of implementation. What does this next phase need to look like? What are the important things that can't be lost in translation as these transformations happen? And so for this first one, it's really, frankly, learning from the Oversight Committee's experience to inform future governance. I think so often in government, we produce a report and then we sort of put it on the shelf and we move on, right? And I think that just can't be the case with this. We really need the ability to continue the progress, continue the learning and implementation, because frankly, we just don't have the time to not do that and to drop the ball here. So I think a piece of this is, we want to make sure that the new governance body has genuine oversight. I think you've heard us talk about this in the past, that at times we've struggled with an understanding of exactly what our purpose as an oversight body is with respect to what oversight looks like and how we can exert that oversight. And so I think this will be really important as we move into the next phase.
Can you clarify what you mean by genuine oversight? Like, what are the tools that would be most appropriate or most impactful?
Yeah, great question. I'm curious, Dr. Taylor, on this question too. I think a couple examples that we as a committee have really wrestled with is budget setting. So who makes the decision and at what level, I think, is a really important discussion. At this point, the Oversight Committee doesn't approve budget changes throughout the course of a year, for instance. A county is fully responsible for essentially achieving what they set out to do in the early part of the fiscal year. But if a change has to happen, there isn't necessarily a requirement to come back and for the Oversight Committee to essentially vote on it. So I think a lot of the discussion is deciding at what altitude decisions need to be made, and making sure that that is carried out. So I think that's one example. Obviously, Metro does have tools that you've used in the past when performance concerns arise. We've seen that in the past. That's an option for corrective action plans. I see that as obviously like one of the ultimate tools, the sort of last tool in the toolbox, if you will. But I think that the discussion about like the rhythms of decision making needs to be had. I don't know that we as a committee have really like landed like the best option, to be honest, in terms of where those altitudes need to happen. But I think the sense is that we don't always have the authority to say thou shalt do this thing, if you will. In a lot of ways, it's more about tracking progress and really providing recommendations in some ways. So I think that level of oversight is an important consideration. Dr. Taylor, anything else?
No, I mean, that's exactly what we discussed is the sort of the lack of enforcement that happens at times, and just making sure that the discussions that we're having, it gets to not necessarily gets to the right individuals, but I'm gonna have to sit and think about that one for a good bit because Mike actually explained it pretty well, what we've discussed before in the past, but
Do you have any examples of when you've recommended something but didn't see any progress or movement?
Got one, maybe.
you got one?
Yeah, I think about the population A-B split.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
We, Dr. Taylor and I actually got quite involved in some of that. So the measure lays out a requirement for how much goes to population A, sort of higher needs individuals, and lower for population B. I think what I'll say, what I observed maybe is that there was some genuine disagreement about the definitions that needed to be used between the counties and Metro. Genuine disagreement is not a problem. That's important to make good public policy. I think what we saw was a lack of action to getting it done. And so I think it was maybe a year ago at this point, we essentially said, hey, can we all just get in a room for some, kind of deep dive sessions and really see if we can just get this resolved? And I found those discussions really helpful. They were illuminating about the different positions that had kind of gotten stuck over the course of the few years of implementation. And I think that was, a good example of like we all got in the room. I think you and I exerted a little influence to try to make it happen, and it did end up resolving in some ways where we now have a level, a shared understanding of the definitions and the practical ways of implementing. I think that's an example of, how do we make sure if there is not disagreement, who makes the decision at the end of the day, I think that could be a decent example.
That's a decent example. I mean, I was trying to figure out a nice political way of saying that, but I mean, I think things happen. I mean, counties are overwhelmed, and it's not due to any lack of effort. There's competing priorities and things, but there's some aspects of the program that we found to be essential, and they can sometimes get lost in the shuffle. And even though we can sternly encourage things to happen, it feels a little differently when there's a little bit more authority attached to it. And so there was disconnects, little versions of that happen. And again, not to point blame or to shift or any of that. Again, these things are happening. But if there was more of, if we had a system that better allowed for, that, authority of enforcement, I think we wouldn't run into as many problems as probably we did.
I might offer.
Didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh yeah, of course. I might offer one other, observation. I think the ways that we actually try to use the oversight body's process to say we have these priorities as a region is an important safeguard. So I guess I'll be more direct here. If the system is meant to end homelessness for population A folks, and you saw where a lot of our investment is going to permanent supportive housing, but there was a sort of easier path to basically saying, let's just do shelter only. Let's make sure that that's our main strategy for ending homelessness. I think having a body that says, no, we actually need to make sure that, yes, we're investing some amount in shelter, but the measures priority goals need to be on ending on creating permanent housing opportunities. I think those kinds of priorities need to be discussed at the regional level and then implemented down at the county level. But if we see a deviation from that, say through a budget change request where there's no insight or, sort of loop back to the body, I think that's a challenge that we have to wrestle with. Like, what if there is a desire to go one direction that really isn't aligned with the purpose of the measure? What protections do we have to make sure that we're aligning with the intent that voters had when they gave the ability to make this program a reality?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a bit of an issue with bureaucracy, and this is where we're at. If there's some degree of dichotomous thinking that goes on that something must be a certain way and that order's carried out, it's hard to loop it back around to leadership, or it's hard to loop it back, to a higher point of the chain. So having some, and we'll probably go into it a little bit after the presentation, but I'll go ahead and go.
Great.
Okay. This is going to go a little bit longer. Sorry about that.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually think we covered a few of the bullets already in this slide, so I'm going to move us forward to the next slide. Thank you. So I think this is an area where we wanted to flag a few areas. We've already discussed a couple of them that we think need continued discussion and insight from the future governance body. Again, these aren't things that we're saying we have the answer as a body, but we think these are the kind of important discussions that if they're not had, they'll just continue to sort of cause problems in some ways. So a couple examples here are population A/B spending goals. Obviously this measure was created in 2019, 2020. The world is very different now, and I think we need to make sure that the split is the right split for our region, that we're thinking about the differences and needs across the region, and that we sort of dig into that a little bit more. I think the prioritization on spending on key program categories, we just talked about that. How much are we investing in solutions that are kind of responding to the immediate need versus responding to prevention or responding to permanent supportive housing? I think the formulas for allocating SHS fundings to the different counties are an important conversation. If we're not having that conversation to make sure that the way we use data to inform how much each county gets out of that split, I think we're not doing ourselves any favors to making sure that we're right-sizing to the best of our ability the investments that we're making compared to the need in a specific region. And then I think the sort of bigger strategic role that SHS funding has in relation to other resources. That's definitely come up a lot, where I think the SHS committee will say, hey, give us insight into how you made this decision about this resource. Mm-hmm. And the counties are often juggling federal and state and local resources sometimes, and so they have better insight about those interplays. And so I think better visibility and understanding of the larger system is an important piece of how we understand that. Currently, we're not asking for reporting on all the things that happen in a region, though. If we can go to the next slide, I think Dr. Taylor's got two more, and then we are almost wrapped.
Okay, so this particular recommendation has strategic importance because it speaks to the public legitimacy. So despite the measurable progress of the program, thousands have been housed, shelter, sustained homelessness has been prevented, the public continues to see a high level of visible homelessness and wonders whether the investment is working. So the gap in perception, it's present and it's real, and it possesses a genuine risk to the sustainability of the program. So building public support requires honest communication. What this program is designed to do, what it has achieved, but also what it cannot do alone. Effective messaging, it should acknowledge the challenges of our system. Doing so would better facilitate an informed public, and which could temper unrealistic expectations. The public, they need to understand the gap between these impressive numbers, these individual successes, and the overall scale of the need. And that gap is due to the structural forces that Mike had spoken about earlier. No single program can overcome that alone. But this initiative, it does fill a very critical gap. but it's also, again, operating against that structural deficit. So, continuing to do the good work, more affordable housing production, eviction prevention, healthcare access, all the things. But in the same token, the things to keep in mind, the federal landscape is also changing. So loss of emergency vouchers, support for mixed status families, all of these are under pressure, fair housing enforcement funding. And so these SHS dollars, they're increasingly being served as backstops for federal reduction of our communities, which can't be controlled within the community themselves. So the public deserves to have an understanding of that role and why it matters. Next slide. Yes. So over the 3 years, this committee has put forward a substantive body of recommendations to strengthen SHS implementation. Many represent multi-year bodies of work, not one-time fixes, but ongoing improvement on how the system operates. Metro coordinates much of this work, and several recommendations have already been integrated into the Housing Department standard operation. So as the governance of the SHS transitions, the continuity of this work, it's not going to be automatic. It's you, as Metro Council and the new governance body that need to take this active role in tracking the progress, supporting the implementation, and ensuring the recommendations move forward. This committee's work is only as durable as the institutional flow-throughs that come after it. Next slide. Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you for all your great recommendations and thinking. I think, we're considering a lot of them right now. So appreciate all your leadership and expertise. I know we'll probably have some questions, but, from our conversation last week, how would you define a regional system? I think this council has various definitions that we're thinking about, but what are the hallmarks? What is a truly regional system look like to you? Either of you.
Got one? Sure. I mean, a regional system can look like anything, but what does kind of a successful one look like? What does one sort of sustainable one look like? Certainly, there should be some degree of alignment. There should also be some degree of a shared language that's there. I mean, that's the best way to ensure changes can that we learn from our mistakes as well as our successes. There's always going to be some degree of tension sometimes between a regional versus a county system, but that tension doesn't necessarily need to be an unhealthy tension. There certainly are good tensions that we may want to think about leaning into more instead of either. I don't want to talk about either. Thoughts?
Dr. Bailey, I think, in a homeless services system, a couple things I think about when, if we're thinking of a regional system, one is a shared data, right? I mean, got to start with a foundation there. So I think the ability to say we have visibility, we have access, we have insight into what's happening across the whole region is kind of paramount to it. So if we don't have that fundamentally, if the data systems and processes are wholly very different in each individual county, for instance, in a region, I think you're definitely not moving in that direction towards a regional system. So I think that's hard. I will say, that's especially challenging for y'all in some ways because the federal government has created continuums of care that often operate at the county level. Our region obviously has a shared data system through the Multnomah County and being able to kind of have that across the region, I believe. But I think there's ways of being able to move towards like better alignment. I think we're mountains ahead of where we were in 2020, but for sure. I think that's a big one. It's one of the reasons why the population AB conversation was so critical for us, because if you have different definitions of what a person is in population A and very different processes for determining whether or not someone qualifies for a specific resource, you're definitely not operating at a regional level. I think another, kind of piece beyond data systems I would think of is sort of like the experience of access. So you want the ability to have different ways that people access. That's I don't think you want to erode the ability for Clackamas County, Multnomah County, and Washington County to have their own processes for access, but if the experience as an end user is so different and so shocking, like where you have to learn a whole new language and process and system in each county, I do think we have work to do there. So what that looks like, how do you align them? How do you talk about them differently or think about them in more consistent ways? I think those are important conversations, because that's where, if I'm trying to seek out assistance and I live in Multnomah County, but my friend lives in Clackamas County, and I don't know exactly where to go, or I don't know how to navigate the system, I think it's a really important lesson for us as a system, is like, how do we start to get better ways of talking about how you actually get help, and sort of what the front doors are. I think the other piece might be like, better ways of moving between the counties. So if I used to be a housing case manager, I worked in Multnomah County, but I would often find locations where folks could go live in Beaverton or Hillsborough. It was pretty common for me just be able to find a unit out there. The ability to say, hey, here's someone that's gonna need extra support, and actually make that transition, I think is a really important piece. Definitely the ability to move and get the portable vouchers between the region. So I know that's been a body of work for a long time. I don't know the current status, but I think that's a good example of like, if we can't master that piece, I think we're not quite getting to a regional system. And no doubt it is complicated, it's messy, but I think those are some of the hallmarks for me that really, kind of spark that. I think, integration with the healthcare system is a really good opportunity where we can think about ways to regionalize, because we have a lot of our CCO infrastructure is regional in this region. So I think that's a benefit to us, where you don't have to have a wholly different process if you're a Care Oregon member, for instance, in Multnomah County versus Washington County. Much of the processes are the same. They're really simple in that way. So that's a somewhat approximate example, but we also have the overlay of the federal system that we have to sort of figure out how it fits in. It's not an easy question, I will grant you that, but I think those are some of the hallmarks that come to my mind about what a regional system could look like.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. It has been one of my biggest honors to be alongside you all in this work. As a non-voting member, often encouraged to turn my camera off and pretend to be a fly on the wall. All of the discussions this past year in particular, as we've been forecasting this change in governance, have been about as real as they can be. And I would love for y'all to reflect on kind of where we are and what gets simplified as the space between housing first objectives and models and the recovery oriented system of care. And those are really glossy words from basically, we are going to put you in housing and surround you with everything and anything you might need to keep you there. And the far polar extreme of you have to earn your way into every next level of service. And I think we don't do either, but everybody's doing something in the middle. And so kind of where are we as a region, and understanding that resources are limited and we have to be targeted, but also we're not going to that extreme of folks needing to earn or level up one little rung at a time. That's a very hot question. It's spicy.
That is a hot question. Where are we now?
Talk to the addiction psychiatrist.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think we are all slowly waking up. I think our knowledge has been growing and maybe a little bit of an exponential rate, maybe out of necessity, because it feels like the world is shrinking and these issues that would involve the quote unquote other are now affecting us in real time, the proverbial us in real time, more of us than there has been before in the past. And so now we're wrestling with these issues, whether it's addiction, whether it's loss of housing, whether it's I can't afford things anymore, things aren't the way that they used to be, and these things. So we're kind of being forced to answer these questions. I think where we're at is we are slowly deconstructing these paradigms that we've had about how to address homelessness. And at the same time, a lot of us are burdened. And so our ability to retain the new information and be plugged in and understand and comprehend, we're managing stress, day-to-day stress at the same time. And so the public at large, it's a lot for them sometimes to grapple for. And that's awareness that we need to have. I do think even in the sort of legislative level, there is a growing awareness about the importance of addressing the addiction, addressing the homelessness, because if these social needs, if they're not addressed, or if we at this level truly aren't considering that, it's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time. Disability will go up. There will be dissent. People will grow unhappy, and then So in order to best ensure community health, that mindset needs to occur. So I'm optimistic. I think I do see that change, but we just all need to be very mindful about being myopic, being a little short-sighted with things, and just being more dialectic in our thinking, and being able to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah, I love this discussion, and I feel like it's such an important. I think back to clients that I've worked with. Actually, when you asked that, I've worked on assertive community treatment teams and intensive case management teams. Work with people with serious mental illness and wrestling with addiction. And I think about specific folks that. I met, and we would talk about what their goals were for treatment and sort of what they envisioned working with a social worker and an addictions counselor would look like. And I just think about how every conversation was so unique. Like, I remember one fellow, first met him, he was very paranoid. It took a long time to build a relationship with him. And he told me he wanted me to hold him accountable. Like, he wanted to be held accountable around methamphetamine use, and that was something that he asked for as part of what I was bringing into his life. And I think about that ask. Like, I would have worked with him regardless. Wouldn't have mattered if he was using methamphetamine actively or not. I was in his corner, And I think he was in a place in his life where he was like, I have enough insight to know this is not helping me, and I want some support with it. And I think that level of that catching him at that moment, I just came into his life at that specific moment. Mm-hmm. And I think, we worked on, okay, let's focus on getting you housing, because he was experiencing homelessness when he first met. And I just think about how we started with where he was at and started to build up where he was at. And honestly, he had a lot of success in terms of staying away from methamphetamine, focusing on his medication, staying engaged. And also, once he was in housing and sort of life continued to happen, he ended up dying actually from methamphetamine use, and he overdosed. And his journey of I want this thing, I want that change, and also this thing is wrestling with me, and I don't know what to do, and I need help. Was such a big part of what our relationship looked like. And I just think about that is one person, one example of the complexity of this discussion, right? Every day was a different day for him. And I just think if we're so, I love Dr. Taylor, what you're saying about just if we're so kind of committed to this way or that way, it misses the complexity of the human condition in this conversation, I think. And so I it's not it's not a great answer in terms of like where you're trying to get at, but I feel like if we don't have options for folks, like if we don't have an option where I can work with that person, we can support that person right where he's at. And I know, hey, you want to get into a place that's going to support your sobriety better than this building that you're in, let's get you there. If that isn't an option, then we're not doing him justice. But if we're also saying the only way is for you to get through this treatment program, X, Y, Z, B, then you can get into support. I think we're also not doing justice to him and his story and people like him. So I think it's a both and, but also to your point, we do not do housing first to fidelity in this region, in the state. I would love to see more, like if every assertive community treatment team, every intensive case management team that had those high level supports had a guaranteed housing voucher to make sure that we're aligning the systems and we're having hard conversations between behavioral health and housing to say who's most in need for this next slot. This is a valuable resource, both from the behavioral health side and the housing side. Who do we need to get into that unit, into that support? I think those conversations are happening. They're not everywhere yet, but there's examples that we've started to build. But I think we need to do that way more and at scale to be able to say we're doing this justice. And I think we also need transitional housing options for those folks that maybe aren't wrestling with serious mental illness, but are trying to answer for themselves. Like they're at that moment that my client was, I want something different. I want to try something different. And to be able to kind of move people as they need it between those options, I think is such a critical part of this. And it's not an impossible challenge to solve. Like it's about getting the right connections between the programs and setting up the expectations for those providers that's how we operate as a system, that people's choices matter and they're real, and that we can't tell people what to do in their lives. So I think it's a really good question. It's a hard one to kind of wrestle with at that system level. Like how do you move from that person to the system answer? But I think those are some thoughts just from my experiences.
Thank you. Councilor Gonzalez.
Thanks, Deputy President Wong. Thank you both for coming. I just want to hold space for the story that you shared as a case manager of working with this human that you invested your part of your soul into trying to help, and then them ultimately succumbing to their addiction is very sad, right? So there's a lot, and unfortunately, there's hundreds of stories like that every day in this region, and not every year in this region, and it's just really powerful. I really appreciate that, and I just wanted to hold that space. Councilor Lewis took my question, like literally right here. I had housing first versus recovery. I was like, damn, you're good. And the reason I wanted to ask that question is because I think, especially, and Dr. Taylor, I think you were talking about this or alluding to it, but it feels like today in our politics, like there's just this hyper polarization, and like you're either this or you're that, and that's like. And I think we're seeing that not just in our county politics, but in our city politics. And I think trying to tell that story of what is actually the system that we want to see. It's really not falling into these binary wars on school of thought. That I'm struggling to figure out how do we help in the second phase of the measure actually deliver this system that we're talking about. So just wanted to mention that, and briefly too, I just watched the season finale of the first episode of the first season of The Pit. I'm not sure if y'all have watched.
It's
what
a
an intense
gut-wrencher.
show!
Yeah.
Like, bruh, I'm just gonna say I cried like 8 times.
Yep.
And but I think like I just seen and I'm bringing it up because there's a lot of plaudits about like the triage in the emergency system and kind of that's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
And just so impressed by like in that space, kind of the case conferencing and the immediacy of resources that we're able to deploy. And I am hearing from at least in the last few years, the most successful elements of the supportive housing services measure is where we deploy regional resources to do this, like case conferencing, this integration, bringing people to the table in a way that a very fragmented and broken system has not done so before. So I've just been thinking about that. My question is, we have 5-6 years with this new oversight structure, and I think so much of what we can do as policymakers is like the stories that we tell, and not just stories of individuals or the system, but like trying to paint the picture to people. This is where we're heading, and I guess I would love to hear from you. The year is 2030. What story do you want to be able to tell people exist in the system? So I wanted to ask the question, but from a slightly different vantage point of what would a successful system look like for you by then?
What would the components be? I mean, on every level, whether it's here in a city, county capacity, to the community on the street, to the state level, and hopefully at some point, federal alignment happens with this as well. There needs to be a shared understanding. I fear that shared understanding will probably, it may come out of necessity, that we will be forced to kind of kick things into gear. Quite often there needs to be some sort of threat for that to happen. That's my concern, that something of that nature may come around. But I think here, all the work that we're doing here, I mean, I really feel that it's a blueprint. It's a blueprint, something that other cities, different states, I mean, a lot, was learned from this experience. And certainly things that I think should be served as a blueprint. So ideally, I'm hoping that the efforts that we make here, we'll find that in the DNA of state plans everywhere. We'll find that in the DNA of a federal plan at some point in time. The same conversations that we had will, people will be able to stand on our shoulders with that. And I think that's something that can happen, but I think in order for that to happen, we need to maintain a focus. We need to sort of ensure, check our priorities. And 2030 is a long time ago. We'll probably be fighting for energy at that point. But there'll be competing priorities for sure. The need for psychological safety will always be important. And housing is tied to that. So it will always be some degree of a priority. And I think just keeping that in mind, keeping in mind the importance of things that are tied to psychological safety, and the need for humans to have that in order to be productive, in order to evade disability, in order to make the best decisions possible. That security needs to be, in some degree, present. So I think in terms of policymakers, keeping that in mind as you're making your decisions and as you are selecting what the priority for the city truly needs to be.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I love the question because, kind of gets you out of your, like, what am I doing right now mode. So I think about, in 2030, our system would have the ability to quickly assess someone's needs and get them connected to the right resources. I think that's like that access piece would need to be something that we can solve by then. I think about like our system's reliance on the tools that we have. Obviously, I think we need to keep investing in technology solutions, in solutions that help make the work easier, that help make access to training and opportunities better for our population, for the staff that do the work. I think about a healthy staff system too. Like I think So often a big challenge this I'm sure you all have heard is just how do we make sure that the staff that do the things every single day have the support they need. That means living wages, that means good benefits, that means that they have opportunities for advancement, that they see themselves in leadership. I think those are those are hallmarks that would be achievable in the next 4 or 5 years. I think that's going to take us wrestling with our priorities too. Like, do we want that as a system to make sure that the people pouring into the people that we're trying to help have what they need, or do we want to open one more shelter and have that one extra thing that's going to start to be, very expensive, very hard to manage? Like, I think those are the wrestling points we're going to have to kind of think about over the next few years, because we don't have unlimited resources. I think speaking to that too, I think we would have gotten much better at telling compelling stories about the efficacy of this system. And as government, we would all be demonstrating our commitment to accountability and transparency in consistent ways across the fold at every level. And so that might look like if I'm a member of the public and I want to know where my tax dollars are going, that it's really easy for me to know exactly what the dollars are being spent on. There's good visibility. I have a good understanding of what that looks like. I feel good as a member of the public that the dollars are being invested well. That means that there's good accountability and tracking, that when things don't go as planned, that we do something about it, we take action. I think the ability to also have housing is going to be critical for this measure. So theoretically in 2030, there would be another opportunity for us to continue to build affordable housing, because like we talked about systemic challenges, if we don't have more opportunities for affordable housing, this work gets a lot harder because more and more people fall into the system. And so that's sort of an outside the SHS world piece of it, but I think that's an important part of how we think about success is we also have access to a pipeline of new affordable units that people can access and utilize. And then, I think just the people are real tired of all the squabbling. Just to put it lightly, I think we need to grow up, get our house in order, and align on some of the directions that we need to go. And that doesn't mean everybody agrees all the time, but it means that when we have a discussion and we put that discussion down to a vote and we make it happen, that we're not continuing to relitigate it forever. That we understand, okay, this is the direction we're going to go as a region, and we're going to make it happen. So that's a big ask, obviously, because everybody has their own interests and needs. But I think the internal sort of debates and stuff that just go on and on and on with no resolution, I think ideally we would get better at disagreeing well, if that makes sense, and then moving on and just getting the work done. Maybe those are just a few hallmarks of what I'd hope to see in four years.
Yeah, I feel that. I felt that deep. Thank you both.
Councilor Rosenbaum.
Thank you, Deputy Chair Huang. First of all, I appreciate Councilor Gonzalez's question. It's my opinion, or it's my perception, that we've been on a steep learning curve, and from your answers, we aren't off the curve yet. We're still climbing the curve, and we have a lot more to learn as we go. I appreciate all the work that the Oversight Committee has done over the past years, a lot of dedication and a lot of support, particularly you as co-chairs, and I think the recommendations you put forward are pointed and clear and really fairly, I wouldn't say they cover all the needs, but I think they're very important and something that we have to deal with. But I have one question. One of your slides said that the new, which is called ARPOC, it should have greater authority to deal with some of these questions. So how do you see the authority issue between the Metro Council and the ARPOC manifesting itself? In other words, there's lots of ways you could do it. It could be just it takes what Metro says and stamps it and says good, or it starts to create a dynamic debate over issues. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, happy to take that. This is my perspective on this. I think you all are creating this new governance body in a sense to delegate some level of authority and decision making. if you don't delegate true authority to this group and you sort of treat it as an advisory committee, and then ultimately every decision that they make then has to come to Metro Council for another decision, I don't know that you've gotten the structure completely right, because I think the counties need to see that they have a voice at the table. They are the ones implementing this. They're the ones that are often, they're not the front line, but they're a bit closer. And they have expertise that is really, really important in the discussion. And I think that's one of the benefits of the structure y'all have laid out, is that there is representation from counties to help kind of drive towards some decision. So I think obviously Metro Council needs to be involved. Y'all are accountable to taxpayers for the work that's happening. I think you all will need to decide exactly when a decision that RPOC makes needs to come to Metro Council for a decision. But I guess I would encourage you to really lean heavily on this group as the decision-making group for the regional supportive housing services measure, because I think there's good representation and it's well thought out in terms of the seats and sort of the voting members in that sense. Is that helpful, or was I not answering the question?
Well, it pretty much answers the question. I guess the question is, it seems you're suggesting that there may be a subset of kinds of decisions which this oversight body could make somewhat, maybe significantly independently, and then there's a subset that obviously Metro, as you said, we're responsible to the voters for the money in the large sense, and some things have to come back to Metro. And you're suggesting that there may be two different levels here. Okay, thanks.
Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to follow up just a little bit on that immediate preceding conversation, because I think it's something we are trying to provide authentic engagement and authentic leadership to the people who join the RPOC. And one way we have thought about it, I think about it, people I know who run somewhat similar types of programs, mostly in the medical field, is to think about Metro setting high-level goals, such as we want, with the information we have available through the point-in-time count or other of our own counts, to see consistent improvement in that across the entire region. And you, RPOC people, figure out how to do that. And as long as you get there, we're fine. Have you seen that kind of decision-making applied anywhere, or something similar to it? Do you have thoughts on it?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think as an executive body, that sounds accurate, but there's always the concern of blind spots that can come with that. Certainly, sometimes it's efficient and effective in order to get to the solution, but it's kind of just ensuring that there's a good amount of representation, certain amounts of inclusion, just to best ensure that the conclusions that you're coming to are the ones that you need to. I think certainly I have no concern at all about how the executive body works, and I for the most part agree with what you're saying, but I think there's some degree of just quality assurance that will probably fall on you. And this happens at any point in time when you delegate or when you release control to some sort of sense. You have to ensure that things are going according to plan. Sometimes you sacrifice that for efficiency, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. So I guess the caveat I would say is just, ensure that there's some degree of QI going on, ensure that there's some sort of exercise or checking your blind spots as we continue to move forward.
Mr. Chair, if I might, I'm not 100%. I appreciate your answer, and it's very thought-provoking, appealing initially, and I have to let it process a little bit. But when you talk about blind spots and you talk about missing things, are you talking about the Metro Council having blind spots? Or are you talking about the RPOC or its members having blind spots? Or both?
I mean, both could be true, but in terms of delegating authority or delegating, control for someone to make decision-making process, first it probably would fall on them, and it's a tough one to answer. Yeah, both parties could certainly be guilty of that, but I was making more reference to them, and but this is, even with the best intention, you can spend years and years creating the best committee that's ever been created, and still it may fall short. So it's mostly just being reminded that to make sure that you are having some degree of really kind of some real quality assurance and just ensuring that. So it's just making sure that mindset is there, not just it's one and done. Thanks for the report. We'll move forward with it. That there's some degree of making sure.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Perhaps if I could just take some time to talk a little bit more about the current planning for the Regional Policy and Oversight Committee that we've been working with Councilor Gonzalez and Councilor Lewis on. I think, Councilor Nolan, I think what you were describing is exactly the thinking as we've passed these SHS reforms in December and we're working towards implementing this new Policy and Oversight Committee for SHS, that we will have these new SHS goals for the next 5 years, new interim goals, that the Regional Policy and Oversight Committee will be tracking, implementing, providing updates and reports back to you all as Metro Council. And additionally, as we are thinking through that, we're thinking through the concurrence model that you all passed via legislation last December and what exactly that looks like and what those touch points between the Regional Policy Oversight Committee and Metro Council are. Because there are nuances in terms of how we implement that model and what feels most supportive and helpful and at which decision points and conversations should we be having at the Policy and Oversight Committee, and when do those get escalated and updates be brought to you all. So I just wanted to assure you that staff and Metro Housing Department staff, council staff, councilors are working on that, and we'll certainly be providing you all updates as we further finesse what that system will be, and it'll probably be iterative, right? This is the first time that we are trying a version of this, so we'll start things and learn as we go and get feedback from you all on that.
Great. Thank you. Colleagues, any more questions, comments? No?
But I'll have just one, this is sort of a technical question. Does anybody have a projection on how many additional supportive housing units will be built or will come online in the next 1 and 2 years? Because, I know from our funds have already been committed and that they're in the works. And we know that a lot has affected federal housing support. So do we have any projection of what we're going to have to work with?
Are you talking about affordable housing units?
Yes.
Or supportive housing units? Yeah, I could, probably in the next couple of months, the counties submit what we call their county annual work plans. And there's a goal area in there for supportive housing units that you're bringing into operation. So probably in a couple months, I could let you know what we're looking at for SHS funding within the next, 12 months. And then we could do some additional work in terms of the 10-year goals for supportive housing units and see how close we are to that. That could give you a pretty close number. But what I can share is that given that SHS is moving more and more towards sustained number of units and housing, we're reaching that point where a lot of the initial startup, we're just starting to see a lot less units. But if you give me a couple of months, I could certainly follow up and let you know what it's looking like for the next year. But it's not looking like any greater than we have had in the previous fiscal years. We're starting to see a decline because of the number of households that we have sustained in housing now. That's where most of the SHS dollars are looking like. So I could give you a good picture by the spring in terms of what it's looking for SHS. And then, of course, there's other funding sources as well that are doing this. But even in those funding sources as well, they're really drying up, and we're seeing a lot less and less funding sources for affordable housing.
Yeah, it's complex. I mean, we are supporting the transportation-oriented development, and we have a couple projects in line that'll come up due in the next couple of years. But there's a lot of other sources that, I don't need to know today, I was just curious.
Okay, well, thank you, Mike and Dr. Taylor. Really appreciate all your work and service and really appreciate the recommendations as well. I think we'll be thinking really hard about, all those recommendations and how those carry over. So thank you so much, and don't be a stranger. Councilor Lewis.
Can you end by reminding us when you're going to our 3 counties, since some of us hear from our commissioners, and we might want to know that timing? Because I think you're giving similar presentations to all 3 counties.
It's like the next 3 weeks, but that's right. Sania probably knows better.
And if you don't have it, follow up over email.
Yeah, I
But
can follow
think
up with you, but they are all in
We
March.
don't want to not know when it's happening.
Yeah, they're all in March, somewhere between March 10th and March 20th is when we go through all 3 of them. But we'll follow up in email, and if any of you would like to join and attend, please let us know.
Their meetings are always on top of our meetings.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to COO Communications.
Thank you, Deputy Council President. I just wanted to note that we are going to be scheduling a work session for council as a follow-up to some individual briefings that we had with you last week regarding the declines in tonnage and pressure on rates and some, potential mitigations that we may be able to employ. So we're looking at mid-March for that, but just wanted to let you know that that's in the works. That's all I had.
Thank you. Councilor Communications. Maybe I'll just start by saying again, if anyone has recommendations, feedback, proposals for the resolution that I'm working on with Councilor Gonzalez, please send them to Kristen. I've scheduled another work session to go over them. So we'll have another opportunity as a group to follow up on that conversation. Is that set for next week, Georgia? Tuesday. It's not set for next Tuesday. We also had MPAC last evening. It was a packed meeting, great conversation. We had the WEA lands proposal. We talked about future vision. We talked about economic development, here at Metro. So a lot of great conversation, a lot of interest in the economic development work that we're doing. So looking forward to future presentations on that. Any other Councilor Communications? Councilor Rosenthal.
If I could just add on to that a little bit, Councilor Huang suggested, and I agreed, that the presentation that WEA made had some interesting concepts and is something that could be made to the entire council. It had to do primarily with how we classify and tier industrial land availabilities for development, economic development. So it was well received by the group, and at any rate, hopefully we'll.
Yeah, I believe that that work that WEA did was after our urban growth report with Sherwood, and our staff kind of worked with them so that they would come back to us. So definitely think it's a big part of a work plan that we'll be returning.
Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you. I am just back from the Textile Recovery Summit, which was co-located alongside 2 other recycling conferences, one focused on plastics. But in that series of presentations, obviously with EPR, Oregon was being talked about, but I wanted to let you know that it was not me and it was not our Metro staff on the stage. But our Reuse Impact Fund was brought up as a national model and an example by a consultant. Our system facilities plan was on the screen as, again, another model for folks to learn from in policy making. And then Waste Management was there talking about the pilot that they did in Troutdale with textile recovery. So it was really great. I came back with 2 whole pages of notes and ideas, and we were on the scene for sure, Metro as a leader. So really want to thank our staff who engage with that group regularly, and just thought it was good news to bring back that people notice what we're doing.
That's great. Okay, well, seeing no further discussion, the council meeting is adjourned. Our next regular meeting is scheduled for March 3rd, 2026 at 10:30 a.m.